panhandler at the top of the stairs and threw the change from his pocket into his empty case. He definitely considered himself a happily single gay man, most of the time. Weekend invites to Fire Island or similar type events only served as a brutal reminder that he was alone. His parents still kept property on Fire Island, a more modest dwelling in Cherry Grove than the one from his childhood summers, but they traveled so much now it seemed a shame to leave it empty, so they rented it out practically every weekend in warmer months, which meant Noah couldn't even use it as an escape from Tony's parties. Regardless, the island rarely held good memories for him anymore. Not since the accident. It wasn't that he couldn't get dates or hookups. They just never amounted to much. His longest relationship had been about 4 months, and it had taken him about as long to feel comfortable enough in their intimate moments. But the scars were too much for plenty of men, and his parents pushed too hard, making most situations uncomfortable. If he failed at finding himself a respectable guy, he'd rather fail on his own. It had been at least 10 years since his last skin graft, which was his 8th surgery, and after that he decided he couldn't take much more. His hand scratched across his chest as he balanced himself against the train door during the bumpy ride, that phantom stinging sensation still remaining so many years later. The scar tissue extended from his rib cage over his shoulder and up the side of his neck to his ear. He'd been told countless times by his doctors that it could have been so much worse. His face might have been equally impaired, his hearing too, damage to his organs even, but the biggest kicker of all, he could be dead. He tried remembering that fact, no matter how discouraging life could be at times. Sure, these parties on the island made him want to run back to the city and disappear into his life, where he didn't have to try to be more than he was, but he wouldn't let it put a damper on his spirits. Besides, he needed to be there for his best friend. He exited the train and climbed up the stairs to street level near Saks Fifth Avenue, where he paused briefly to admire their whimsical flower display before crossing at the busy light. Truth was, he loved his job in retail at Home and Hearth, an upscale lifestyle store featuring furniture, lighting, art, and modern hardware. He always had an eye for design, so he enjoyed creating displays on the floor, and he wasn't opposed to the hard work of lifting and stocking shelves. It wasn't the best pay, certainly not to his parents' standards, but it helped him afford his modest apartment, which he'd furnished quite nicely over the years. His job was the only thing he looked forward to during the week, that and the lemonade served by the hot Asian guy at the bagel shop next door. Coffee only made him jittery, and he could stand for less of that. He sipped his sweet drink as he stepped inside the store and took in the warm and inviting bedroom display he'd helped design back in June. The manager had decided on a dorm room college theme, even though summer had barely begun. But that was how it went in retail. You always anticipated the next season. The store was large enough for several staff to be on shift at once, and he noticed that Samantha and Michelle were on the floor with him today. Michelle was a bit of a gossiper, but Samantha was chatty and easygoing, and that would help for any lulls in the schedule, though those happened pretty rarely during peak tourist season. William Crossen had just punched in as well. "Call me Will," he'd said his first day on the job a few months back, and Noah thought that was a sign of how friendly he'd be. Not exactly the case. Will was definitely easy on the eyes. Noah could stare at his perfectly sculpted cheeks, dimpled chin, and luscious lips all day. But of course, it was all one-sided, not only because Will was more than likely straight, but because outside of work niceties, he had probably not spoken much else to Noah unless he was pushed for details. But he was a hard worker and good with the customers. He just never shared anything of himself with anyone and rarely went for a drink with the group. Maybe he had stuff to keep private, and didn't Noah know all about that? Soon enough, they all got busy on the floor as the customers poured in. They were a mix of tourists, apartment dwellers, and families who seemed to be getting their kids set up at NYU or Columbia, parents looking for smaller bedroom sets for their young adults or help with decorating rooms vacated by grown children. There was a line at the cash register all evening, and by the end of the shift, Noah's feet ached. He was relieved to lock the door behind the last customer so they could clean the floor and cash out. Noah grabbed his bag from his locker in the staff room, and in his side view noticed Will checking messages on his phone. He'd seemed more reserved than usual today, not that Noah knew him well enough to understand his moods, but now something he was listening to on his voicemail made his eyes light up. Probably a hot date. Will checked the clock on the wall and then quickly grabbed for his bag. He fished a small white card out of his pocket, scribbled on it, and then scrambled toward the door. He muttered a rushed goodbye over his shoulder, and it wasn't until Noah looked down to retie his shoelace that he noticed Will had dropped the card he'd just written.